She is allowed by Mahasweta a moment of dry wisdom, this is what I was referring to, clear of reproductive heteronormativity, when she perceives the statue as a statue, not the representation of a lost object as beloved, and is made to say in the book, the flowers at his feet are already wilted, Nobit. Crows will shit on his head. Dirt will cover him. Haven't you seen the distress of the god at Monasha's open shrine all year round? There is powerful irony here. In her innocent consciousness, the old woman conveys an equation of the man with the idol, the god, the Monasha's open shrine. The merely good human man is somewhere else, this Nobin, statistical. Yet for the sake of a statue, this is a quote, a great statistical loss can descend on the Nobins of this world, because a lot of good could have been done with the money. But she is elsewhere. She's only thinking of the statue as statue. In the second story in the collection, The Fairy Tale of Mohanpur, Mahasweta moves down in class to represent a subaltern old woman. In this story, the young male post-colonial activist is shown at work calling on the state to insert the subaltern into the circuit of citizenship and claim her claims. The subaltern herself is only imperfectly aware of the efforts, accepting the frailties of old age. This is the greatest problem of subalternity. Subaltern brought to crisis is different, but accepting it as normality, accepting the frailties of old age. In her case, the loss of eyesight especially, as she accepts the changing world. In the end, the activist succeeds in bringing her to the hospital in extremis. What we are shown at the end is the simple joy in material comfort, again, when the subaltern is unexpectedly rewarded, as she thinks, with the blessings of citizenship. This is a warning to all benevolent feudality, including that of the World Social Forum, which sees in the subaltern's smile evidence of a self-conscious support for critical activism that is perceived, the representation of the rural Brahmin girl as the old woman in the wisdom that has touched bare life, which I just read. This is something else, I quote. Anvi's eyes are heavy with sleep. She thinks nothing about the fate of her eyes. She has been admitted to hospital. She will eat all kinds of things at the hospital. The doctor will come again from that district town. Everything just like a fairy tale, one by one, she mutters, amazed, and her face in sleep within the depths of this fairy tale ravine looks most fulfilled. To conclude this autobiographical and confessional piece, I move to my own standing as honorary male, receiving gifts from what was, in my time of studentship, the male-identified academy from my good teachers, even as I received the patriarchal constitution that has marked me and all women of my generation permanently. In answer to a question at the Radical Philosophy meeting, as some of you were, I was able to acknowledge one of the gifts that I had received from my subaltern educational activism, the instrumentalization of love as only one of the historically specific ways to reproduction within an originary queerness. Now I outline my own itinerary as far as I can on the high road. As some of you know, Paul Duman was my teacher. In a piece published in Boundary 2, I have suggested that in Allegories of Reading, Duman gives us a confessional moment when he describes his ahistorical approach generationally, pointing towards another way of reading. I follow Duman to displace his history-bound mistake into another use of Schiller following Kant. I track that trajectory as the methodological red thread to undo aesthetic education through a book of essays. Thought as an instrument of abstraction, I argue that gender is in fact a position without identity, an insight coming to us via queer studies from David Houghton, sexualized in cultural practice. We can therefore never think the abstracting instrumentality of gender fully. With this brief introduction, I will go to the conclusion of Duman's Kant and Schiller and myself conclude this piece. Duman did not meddle with gender, yet he singles out a passage in Schiller that engenders the aesthetic and leaves it, Duman leaves it deadpan. Allow me to quote, "Hypotyposis for Kant is a very difficult problem that again threatens philosophical discourse, whereas on the necessary borderlines in the use of beautiful forms, it is offered by Schiller as a solution. The sensory becomes a metaphor for reason. You will remember Derrida talking about family as metaphor. The sensory becomes a metaphor for reason. This extends to humanity, which it turns out is not entirely a principle of closure, because humanity is not single. This is all demand on Schiller. Humanity is not single, but it has a polarity. It has the polarity of male and female that inhabits it, and this is how Schiller copes with that problem. The other sex, Schiller says, the female sex can and should not share scientific knowledge with man, but by ways of its figural representation, it can share the truth with him. Men tend to sacrifice form to content, but women cannot tolerate a neglected form, not even in the presence of the richest content. And the entire internal, this is why psychology, and the entire internal configuration of her being entitles her to make this stern demand. It is true, however, that in this function she can only acquire the material of truth and not truth itself. Therefore, the task which nature disallows women, the other sex, this task must be doubly undertaken by man if he wishes to be the equal of woman in this important aspect of his existence. He will therefore transpose as much as possible out of the realm of the abstract in which he governs and is master into the realm of the imagination and of sensibility. Taste includes or hides the natural intellectual difference between the two sexes. It nourishes and embellishes the feminine mind with the products of the masculine mind and allows the beautiful sex to feel what it has not thought and to enjoy what it has not produced by its labor. End of the Schiller quote. Demand continues. That much for women. Schiller's humanism is showing some of its limits here. At any rate, the theoretical conclusion of this passage would be that just as the sensory becomes without tension a metaphor for reason, in Schiller, women become without oppression a metaphor for man, because the relation of woman to man is that of the metaphor to what it indicates, or that of the sensory representation to reason. In the same way, Schiller's considerations on education lead to a concept of art as a metaphor, as the popularization of philosophy. Philosophy, as you saw, writes demand, is the domain of men. Art is, basically the beautiful is, the domain of women. The relationship is that of metaphor. End of quote. I have no interest in rescuing either Schiller or demand into good gender politics, whatever that might be. It is not a secret that feminization is a put-down. Yet, by itself, feminization, I mean, Edward argues this in Korean prison, yet by itself, feminization cannot necessarily be a put-down. And the aesthetic for Schiller is a powerful thing, fit for princes. These letters are written to the prince. It's a powerful thing, fit for princes, which can save the world from itself. It cannot be denied that these peculiar deployments of woman is the moment of transgression which beckons to be undone, and I hope to do so. Suppose we attempt to reverse and displace the ancient binary until woman is a position here without identity. I say attempt because the force of the effort is the force of reading and thinking, since interest determined by sexual difference cannot disappear. Keeping this in mind, I recall our efforts in the early days of academic feminism, distinguishing between male tasks and domestic female and servant tasks as follows. One time only as opposed to cooking and cleaning, let us say. Schiller's woman is upper class at first glance. If, however, you look closely at the passage Demand quotes, you will see that the distinction between access to truth and access to figuration is a displacement of the distinction between one time and repetition that we discuss as historically assigned to male and classed female. It is in this sense that one can add the concept metaphor of female to Bauer, the tasker as old woman rather than Schiller's gentlewoman, to think the place of the aesthetic as useful to shore up a world gone awry by rational choice and the extreme abstract rationality of the electronics, where imagination itself is empiricized into reasonable programming, even as the imagination as event inevitably